Today's theme is Promises Made and Promises Broken. I'm Ann Kim, Washington Monthly's contributing editor, and I'm joined today by a politics roundtable. We have Washington Monthly's editor-in-chief Paul Glastris, politics editor Bill Scher, and executive editor for digital Matt Cooper. Good morning, everybody.
Great to be with you.
Morning.
So, of course, the big news this morning is Trump's trade deal with China. The United States has agreed to lower the tariff on Chinese goods to a mere 30%, and China has agreed to lower the tariffs on US goods to 10%. So, Trump did promise to levy tariffs, and he has succeeded in launching a pretty devastating trade war. Not sure the rest of the world and US voters will see this as much of a success. What do you guys think?
There's a term for this that we're no longer allowed to use because it's considered inappropriate. But the term has to do with, bad instructions leading to a whole lot of chaotic movement that leads to nothing. And that seems to be what we've got. It's early to tell. It's early that there's 90 days of a pause for China and the United States to come up with a deal. But, there's nothing in what has been announced that locks China into giving the United States and the Trump administration anything they've asked for, as far as I can tell. And, what seems to have happened is that China stood up to the United States more than any other country, responded in kind to the tariff provocations of President Trump. And it led to global chaos and near catastrophe. And it looks like Donald Trump has backed off. There's other reads of it, but that's what it looks like.
I mean, obviously Trump's not sticking with 145%, which would just throttle the entire, trading relationship. But to the average consumer, the tariffs haven't really hit yet. It's hit at the market level. We've had gyrations in the stock market, and you might see it in your 401ks, but you haven't quite seen it at the grocery store yet. And the Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, talking about what was tentatively agreed with the UK, said, quote, "We will not go below 10%. That's just not a place we're going to go." They impose a 10% sort of baseline global tariff on everything. And so to take him at face value, that's our best case scenario. Our best case scenario is that Trump backs down and we're left with a 10% increase on all imported goods.
Which is huge.
Yeah. I mean, like the average. So in a media narrative and probably the way the stock market traders are acting, this is somehow a relief because it's not as bad as you thought. But I think at the consumer level, they're just going to see a 10% increase on a lot of imports, and when they were promised price decreases on day one. So I still think this is a problem. I mean, to the extent that Trump cares, it's a problem for him that people aren't going to be happy with him, but it's a problem for the Republican Party that they're going to own this going into the midterms.
Right. And then let's remember the average tariff now is only about 3% that America applies to foreign goods. So 10%, while it sounds rather modest compared to the outlandish 145% he was talking about vis-a-vis China, it's still, a very sizable increase for everybody, especially for people with whom we're running surpluses and whatnot. So it's been, terribly destructive, but I don't think we know how it's going to play out yet. I got my first announcement last night, as I'm sure you did, saying we've cut a deal with China. Well, we didn't really actually cut a deal. They maybe agreed to, how many water pitchers would be on the table and what snacks they might have. They didn't really agree to anything. And then maybe later they just kind of got to this pause. But I think it could still play out in any number of bad ways that screw up supply chains, lead to uncertainty. It's certainly causing much tumult in the bond market, which is much bigger than the stock market and really has potential to be more devastating in the long term.
Yeah, and there's two things I want to point out here too. The average increase in tariffs from Smoot-Hawley was only 20%, right? So the 30% tariff on China.
Smoot-Hawley being the tariff increase that deepened the depression, the worldwide depression in 1931.
Right, right. And then the second thing is that we've already seen a huge number of cancellations and empty container ships. So at the Port of Los Angeles, for example, they were reporting that, shipping volumes were down by 35%. And so those shortages are going to start hitting shelves in the next month, few weeks. And even if all of a sudden everything goes back to normal, we're still going to have that shock that we saw during COVID, where you had the months of empty supply ships and then prices going up, and maybe we'll stabilize. So I agree with you guys.
Yeah, I guess the question to the gang is this a promise kept or a promise abandoned on China? I mean, I was making the case that it was a promise abandoned, in that I see nothing that the actions of the president have gotten positively for the United States. Obviously, we're 4 months into the administration, so there are 4 years to go. There's plenty of time for the administration to achieve something, but there was a huge amount of action and promises of immediate benefits, and this particular thing that happened yesterday, today, seems to have achieved essentially nothing but more talking and a stepping away from a catastrophe of the administration's own making. Am I wrong?
Well, I mean, you can what's the promise? I mean, Trump's promised everything in the price spectrum. He promised lower price on day one. He promised to remake the entire global economy with the imposition of global tariffs. Like the promises don't. He's gonna keep one and break one way or another. And I don't know if his promise vis-a-vis China was tethered to a specific number. So you could argue that by doing any sort of tariff, he's kept that side of the promise. But he promised that people's prices would go down. That is, I mean, he's trying to argue that it has, but I think he's cherry picking data there, or misrepresenting data.
There'd be a renaissance of American manufacturing,
right?
And the trade imbalance
immediately, if at all.
Right. And the trade imbalance would decrease, if not evaporate. And I think that,
and that China, and part of that is China would buy more American stuff. Remember, he had a trade war with China in his first term. He backed off after conducting some negotiations in which China agreed to buy several $100 billion worth of more U.S. goods, primarily agricultural goods, which they then did not buy, right? So we've been through this before, and color me skeptical that he's achieved anything yet or will achieve anything.
Right. And as with his reworking of NAFTA in the first term and giving it a new name, he'll basically do anything and declare victory.
Yeah.
Well, let's go back to Trump's first speech to Congress. And the kind of global promise he made was that, he would, quote, usher in the greatest and most successful era in the history of our country. So he has, in fact, kept a few of the promises he made in that speech. He did end foreign aid. He did fire workers, federal workers. He did end DEI, and he levied tariffs. But then there's a whole bunch of other promises that he made. If we could go through kind of some of these, and let's grade him on how he did. First promise was to make government more efficient, and that was Doge. What grade do you guys give him on this whole enterprise to, quote, root out waste, fraud, and abuse?
Well, if you define efficient as disastrous, I guess he succeeded. I mean, there's no sign that Doge led to significant cost savings, and certainly no sign that it led to better results from existing programs. It just, needlessly smashed lots of things that were basically working, and left us.
There's a very good Washington Post story on this that came out yesterday on Sunday, I believe. I mean, they even for departments and agencies that weren't literally eliminated, they've throttled their ability to get their spending request approved, and so they've essentially been throttled. And what that literally means is like they've added red tape, they've added bureaucracy to make it so government can't function properly. I mean, it's the exact thing that conservatives have long said they wanted to root out. So you talk about waste. You know, you are actually paying for people to sit around and do nothing because they can't function. So it's not something that I think is intended to make government more streamlined and more effective and more efficient. It's intended to smoke people out, to make working there untenable so they'll quit. And I hate to sound excessively conspiratorial here, but I think that it's premised on a belief that, you know, the deep state, the civil service, is not in line with MAGA, and we got to get rid of them one way or another. And so it's a way to kind of wrench us back to a Jacksonian Democratic Party spoil system, where we can just get our own people in there by hook or by crook. And that's not. And the reason we moved away from the spoil system was that it was a very inefficient government, and you wanted professionals in there to do things effectively.
Okay, well, here's another promise. We've kind of touched on this already, but the big one, of course, was defeating inflation, price of eggs, etc. If an F minus were possible, I think that's what you would probably get at this point.
I mean, they're actively trying to make prices go higher. I mean, some things. I forgive me, Matt and Ann, if I have not conversed on the current data for every line item. My understanding is that Trump has oversold or misrepresented his claim that groceries are down, eggs are down, all that kind of stuff. There may have been a flattening. You know, it hasn't gone completely through the roof in the first 3 months, but of course the tariffs haven't kicked in yet. So it's a little premature to be patting yourself on the back.
Yeah, it's exactly right. I mean, some things have continued to come down as they were under Biden, certain grocery costs and other consumer necessities. But, you know, other things are going to go up because we're slapping huge taxes on them. So it's inevitable prices are not going to flatten enough. And then this is why the Federal Reserve is keeping its powder dry to wait and see what to do.
Here's a pair of contradictory promises, and this gets to your favorite topic, Bill, which is reconciliation.
Right.
In the speech to Congress, he both promised to balance the budget and do tax cuts. So how are we doing on that particular promise?
Well, it's the balanced budget part that I think has made this so complicated, potentially to the point of being untenable. You know, Dick Cheney said deficits don't matter. When you say deficits don't matter, you can do tax cuts and not worry about the rest of it. And there's a certain substantive argument to be made that deficits don't matter. I wouldn't take it to the extreme, but there's no precise number that literal balance is not necessary at the federal level. It's true at the state and local level, but not at the federal level. And how much give you have there is not agreed upon. So that's why we have so many debates about this stuff. But you have a Freedom Caucus faction that has made, if not literal balance, you know, great strides towards literal balance a priority, and that's complicated everything else in this equation, because you only have to lose, you know, 4 or 5 people depending on who shows up to the vote at this point, or the bill can't pass the House, let alone your margins in the Senate. And between trying to sustain the old tax cuts in the Trump first term that expire, adding new tax cuts, trying to cut from Medicaid, which is fraught for moderates, trying to deal with the SALT cap, the state and local tax deduction that a handful of New Yorkers and Californians and Jersey Republicans want to raise. it's not coming together. They have not found the sweet spot here, because doing all of those things can't actually happen. There's got to be sacrifice and surrender on the parts of one or more factions. And if Trump doesn't have the juice because he's a lame duck and his polls are tanking and what's coming around the bend in terms of prices doesn't look good, just to look at one of these factions here, the Salt Caucus faction. If this bill doesn't pass, if it just doesn't happen, the salt cap that was imposed in the first Trump tax bill expires, and they get what they want. So the only way to get them to say, hey, it's in your incentive to cut some kind of deal here because we want to help Trump, and your political future is intertwined with Trump. Well, maybe that's not true if you're a New York Republican or a California Republican or a Jersey Republican. So that's where the lame duck stuff and Trump's poll numbers has some actual bearing on the outcome here.
And then Trump has also made, this is an aside, but he has made some noises about, increasing taxes on very rich people. So I'm wondering what you guys think about if that creates any opening for Democrats to muddy things even more on this debate.
Well, I think it would be a smart move for them to at least discuss it more. I think it would just rip apart the conference. There's just not the political support within the conference to raise taxes on anybody. So but it's not bad that they're floating it. The Dems can make more hay out of the rich not getting taxed enough, but I think they've kind of played that card as much as they can. I think they need to link, as we've said before, linking corruption to tax cuts, linking cutting entitlements to tax cuts. It makes more sense than just sort of saying the rich aren't paying their fair share, which has been a familiar mantra. So there's something to work with there.
I mean, that's the Steve Bannon argument that he said publicly. This will destroy the Democrats if we raise tax on the wealthy. We're MAGA, we're working class, we're a populist party. We don't need to kowtow to the billionaires anymore as Republicans, and we'll rob Democrats of their favorite talking point. I think there's limited truth to that. Obviously, Democrats do like saying this tax bill, whatever crumbs you get, is really for millionaires and billionaires. That worked for them in the 2018 midterm elections when they got the last tax cut package passed through with a partisan Republican vote. But if you're still gutting Medicaid, which impacts a lot of middle class people, not just the poor, I don't think you've really saved yourself very much. We said, well, at least we raised the tax bracket on the wealthy to 39%. Well, I'm still getting screwed on Medicaid. How does that help me? And my prices are going up at the grocery store to boot. So I'm getting a tax increase that way. So I think Bannon's overselling the political potential, and it really could destroy the last thing that unites Republicans. I mean, that's the brand. We cut taxes. That's what we do.
Well, they lost that with the tariffs, right?
Well, it's already deeply sullied with that. But I think for some Republicans, they're trying to we didn't do it. Trump did it. We didn't do it.
Right.
If you're asking me to put my fingerprints on a tax cut, a tax increase,
a tax hike, right?
I just don't know how they survive after that. I mean, what does the party stand for? What is the brand if that's the case?
Matt, you mentioned corruption, so there's some fun things to talk about on that score. But I do want to get to one other promise that Trump made with mixed results, and that's on immigration. He did promise, mass deportations. That hasn't happened, but now he's in the process of trying to carry out this promise of mass deportations by trampling on civil rights. I mean, over the weekend, there was news that he is considering suspending the writ of habeas corpus, which the Constitution expressly forbids except in the case of invasion or war. So this seems to be a promise that maybe he should not try to keep for a variety of reasons. But how do you guys think he's doing on this whole question of immigration, and is his support on this topic cratering at this point?
Right. Well, I think as we saw in the first term, there is a limit to how far he can push his agenda. And in the first term, kids in cages, cost him a lot of political support. And this time, I think he's pushing it too far as well. Maybe not in terms of the total numbers of deportees, but in terms of these civil rights violations, this walking right up to a constitutional crisis with the courts, the use of foreign prisons, and his unwillingness to help reverse the case of someone who the administration itself admitted was sent to El Salvador in error. So I don't think he's doing great on that, but I think it's still an issue where there's general support. Maybe Bill can address this. I mean, I think there's general support for the idea of deportations, but I think people want order, and just as they didn't want chaos at the border during the Biden years, they don't want a chaotic deportation mess. I mean, I think they want to see those who are here illegally and have severe criminal records deported. I think there's a pretty broad consensus for that, and and that's kind of what he hinted he would stick with, at least initially. The problem is he's gone well beyond that.
Yeah, I mean, I think public opinion wise, general support for deporting criminals. And Trump often would make it sound like he was only talking about criminals, murderers, rapists, and such. He's not people, just farm workers who are keeping the cost of your produce down. And the strategy in the Biden administration on the part of Republican governors to bus migrants to big cities, I think had political impact. You particularly saw I think a depression in the New York area, which I think can be partly attributed to that, because if there's some sort of public facility that's being used to house migrants that otherwise the community can't use, or you're seeing people piled up in airports, that's very visible. People feel that to some extent. And I live in Massachusetts, and I know there are places in Massachusetts where there are local tensions because a gymnasium was being used, otherwise would be available for the community, and so that frustrated some people. So that added this sense of chaos. Now I think by the time we got to the 2024 election, that dissipated in a lot of places. But there was an aftertaste. There was the inflation situation contributed to it, and so it ended up being a net negative, for Democrats. But to replace that kind of chaos with different kinds of chaos, where anybody can be abducted off the street because they wrote something in a college paper, or someone who is actually allowed to be here legally but can get swept up and tossed into a foreign prison with no due process. That's very unsettling to people. And if it's not creating stability in other ways for the average American, particularly on the price front, what's the benefit? He sold something that was more surgical. I'm going to get rid of criminals. And that's not what you're seeing in the headlines. You're seeing people who are not criminals, who are being subject to abduction. That's not a popular position.
Yeah. Now, on this issue of corruption, just breathtaking corruption talked about in just the last week. First, we have the crypto scheme where he's offering a private dinner to the top 20 buyers of his Trump meme coin. And the Times reported this morning that people are actually saying that they want to influence policy, and that's why they're buying the coin. So that seems kind of bad. And then you have the government of Qatar donating a plane to Trump that's worth $400 million. $400 million, I think. Just out and out graft, clear violation of the emoluments clause of the Constitution. You would expect to see more outrage, but I'm not sure that I'm seeing it yet. Like, where is the outrage? When's it coming? What's it going to take?
I wouldn't assume there's not outrage. I mean, this plane story got a lot of attention in the past 24 hours. It's such a fire hose of insanity that a lot of things don't break through.
So many levels, yeah.
Yeah. the plane one did break through as far as the media coverage is concerned. Now, how that translates to public opinion, you probably won't be able to really tell for, a couple
I
of
think
weeks.
it's breaking through. The conservatives. There's been a lot of demonization is not quite the right word, but concern about Qatari influence in American government, American universities. It's become a conservative mainstay that these are Iranian allies. It's not entirely true, but they're more sympathetic to Iran than the other Gulf states. But in any event, there's been a lot of Qatar bashing, and then he accepts this, gift, if you can call a 747 a gift, from Qatar. It undermines so many Republican talking points, and it's something people can understand, right? They gave him a plane. That's a little more direct than Eric and Don running a crypto business. Although I think people get that too. So they're really just backing up the truck. In the first term, which now seems quaint, owning a hotel in Washington where you can encourage people who want to influence you to spend money seems so charmingly quaint now at this point compared to like just backing up the truck and billions into crypto accounts, uh, you know promises of planes from foreign governments. Not to mention, I mean, you're an attorney. The one thing that was on the mind of the founders was foreign influence in the American government. They were extremely worried that foreign powers were trying to crush the new democracy, and that's why there are all these qualifications about whether that the president has to be American born, that members of the Senate and House have different requirements, how long they have to be naturalized citizens. There's a lot of concern about foreign influence. Well, that 250-year-old tradition is now, is now gone. As he's just says, sure, send me a plane. I'll take whatever baubles you want. I mean, we're getting to the point where you're just going to have to show up with bags of Krugerrands, to take a meeting.
I mean, there's a kleptomania here. I mean, you've already fleeced the crypto industry for $2 billion. Like, what else do you need? You should be able to buy your own plane at that point. But
Right.
I literally owned Trump Airlines at one point, and you need a free plane from. I mean, this make Abscam look like a walk in the park.
And over the weekend, it emerged that he had maintained this fiction in the first term. Well, I'm not going to sell my ownership in my businesses. I'm not going to put anything in the blind trust like the previous 44 presidents. But I'm not going to run the business. Well, now we learned over the weekend that's actually not true. He did continue to run the business. He did not. The organization chart didn't really change. So it's. I think the Qatari thing is going to break through. It may not actually happen in the end. I think it's so bad. It raises first of all, it raises so many security concerns because he wants to use this as Air Force One. The reason it's taken so long to come up with a new Air Force One is because of all the security concerns that it takes to load up the defensive measures and whatnot. I mean, I'm not totally sure this is going to happen, but the fact that he's trying to do it is stunning.
It is stunning. Well, it's a big step up from the stakes and the Bibles, and it's not enough to, fleece his low-income supporters. He's moving on to bigger game. So what are you guys looking for this week? There are some major doings in the Supreme Court. For instance, there's going to be a hearing on nationwide injunctions in regard to birthright citizenship. So that's coming, I think, on Thursday. So that's going to be huge as far as with the stance of the courts. I guess reconciliation bill still going on. This is make or break for that tax bill. What do you want to add on that, and what else are you looking for?
Well, I think they're releasing the specifics of the House plan on Medicaid, which I believe Democrats released a CBO analysis saying it was going to be over $700 billion, which is only a minor difference from the $880 billion that was telegraphed in the resolution. That's the precursor to the bill, and that might make a lot of the. I mean, you only can lose like 4 or 5 here, and you have more than that in vulnerable swing areas. that might be too steep for that moderate faction to accept. But if they whittle it down any further, they might lose, the folks on the right. I mean, you can split the difference on almost anything in a budget reconciliation bill. And so if you want a deal, you can probably find a way to get there. The question is, does Trump have the ability to say to all these factions, it's in your interest to do some deal, even if you're not going to like every aspect of it? And that, to me, remains a really big unknown.
Matt, what are you
Right.
looking for this week?
Well, obviously, with the war in Ukraine and negotiations and where that all goes, I think is anybody's guess. I'm very interested in the reaction of American Jews and American Jewish leaders who supported Trump, who thought he was a much better deal for Israel. They're now finding themselves shocked by his eagerness to make a nuclear deal with Iran. They're shocked by his calling a ceasefire with the Houthis. They're shocked by this Qatari thing. I think it was sort of all entirely foreseeable, but I think that fallout from from that part of American Jewry is going to be really interesting to watch this weekend. And finally, I'm always keeping an eye on the bond market because I think stocks go up and down. The thing about bonds is it's supposed to be a fairly steady, almost relentlessly logical thing, which is that interest rates go in a certain way when the economy goes a certain way. The demand in American securities is constant and never ending. I think we're seeing signs that that's fading, and that is truly worrisome in terms of continuing to fund our debt and the whole global economy. So watching all that.
Right. Well, thank you guys. It's great to see you, and look forward to seeing you guys next Monday. I'm Ann Kim, contributing editor of Washington Monthly, joined by Bill Scher, politics editor, and executive editor for digital, Matt Cooper. If you like what you saw today, please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and leave us a comment. Tell us what we can do better. Tell us what you like. And don't forget to tell your friends about Washington Monthly. All right, everyone, take care.
Thanks.